Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye, and that passes unanimously. On to item 2. Consideration with possible action on a request to approve wage agreement between the City of Green Bay and International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, Local 158, with a 1% general salary increase effective with the start of the pay period in which October 1st, 2021 occurs. Staff?
You have I think we have some feedback in there. We're having some technical difficulties.
You sound really far away, Joe. Let's do this. Does anyone have any questions for staff?
Looks like they did a good job.
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye, and that passes unanimously. Okay, item number 3, consideration with possible action on grievance number 2020-003 and 2020-004 filed by the Green Bay Professional Police Association regarding the flexing of schedules for specialty team training. Staff. Joe's taking us on a tour of the council chambers.
Sounds like there are 2 lines open. That's usually when there's that feedback.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I can hear you now.
All right, I'm out of breath, but.
All right. So we're waiting for staff to give us some guidance on this grievance from the bargaining unit with the police department.
Yep, and Attorney Mather is here to do that for you. She just got into her office.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry, didn't realize all my stuff was turned off. What was the question? I was trying to fix the microphones in the council chamber.
All right, that's fine. We just introduced the item number 3, and we're just looking for some direction on proceeding from here.
Sure. So these are 2 grievances that are being considered together from the Green Bay Professional Police Association. And although this is what I sent the script for.
Yep.
So did you read that?
Yep. And do you want me to just take off with that, or?
I believe that that's probably the best way to get started, is to just get right into going through that script and then see if anybody has any additional arguments they want to make.
All right, sounds good. Let me see. Let me pull that up. Give me 1 second here, folks. Nope, hang on a second. All All right, we're on to item number 3. Consider, okay, I read all that. It's the goal of the Personnel Committee to provide and conduct a hearing that is fair in form, appearance, and substance. To ensure that this hearing satisfied these goals, each member of the Personnel Committee, please confirm the following by stating "I confirm." And I'll have you do this one by one. The first is, I do not have an interest or a conflict of interest in this matter. Alder Dorf,
I confirm.
Alder Johnson,
Confirmed.
Alder Corpus Dax. Okay. Number 2, I have not received any communications from any person or party about this matter. Alder Corpus Dax,
I confirm.
Alder Johnson,
I confirm.
Alder Dorf.
I confirm.
Okay. Decision
Alder
will be-
Galvin will need you to confirm both as well, please.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I confirm on both.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. A decision will be made based upon the labor agreement between the City of Green Bay and the Green Bay Professional Police Association in effect as of the date of the event complained of. The Personnel Committee will either announce its decision tonight or take the matter under advisement and have a decision at the next committee meeting. The Personnel Committee will make findings of fact and conclusions of law based upon the record before it. At this time, the following materials have been submitted into the record. One is the original grievance number 2020-003, identified as Green Bay Professional Police Association contract violation information form, dated August 6th of 2020 and attached documentation. Number 2, the original grievance number 2020-004, identified as Green Bay Professional Police Association contract violation information form, dated August 11th, 2020 and attached documentation. Number 3 is a memorandum from Commander Kevin Wark to Patrol Supervisor, Specialty Unit Supervisors, reference training and flexing of shifts, special units, dated September 22nd, 2020. Item number 4 is a grievance response, number 2020-003 from Chief Andrew Smith, dated October 13th, 2020. Number 5 is a grievance response, number 2020-004 from Chief Andrew Smith, dated October 13th, 2020. Number 6 is a letter containing step 2 grievance response from HR Director Joseph Falls to Detectives Kemp and Scanlon and Officer Kenny regarding grievances number 2020-003 and 2020-004, dated November 23rd of 2020. Lastly is a letter from HR Director Joseph Falls to the Personnel Committee, dated January 6th, 2021. Pursuant to Section 3.8.3 of the Labor Agreement, the committee may decide whether to hold a fact-finding hearing. As neither party has requested a fact-finding hearing, the committee will consider as evidence only the materials which have been submitted into the record. No testimony or further evidence will be considered. Both parties will be permitted to make arguments in support of their written submissions. Does either party wish to make arguments in support of their written position? Detective Scanlon or Detective Biller?
I would like to make a brief statement in support of our position.
Okay. To ensure this hearing proceeds in an orderly fashion, I will describe the process that will be followed. The grievant will have up to 10 minutes to present its the written submission. The city will have 10 minutes to present its argument in support of the written submissions. The grievant will then have 5 minutes for a closing statement, and the city will have 5 minutes for a closing statement. Throughout this process, the Personnel Committee members and chair may ask questions of any speaker. Please answer the questions asked and do not engage in debate. The committee will close the hearing and enter into committee deliberation. If anyone needs accommodations to speak, I'm sorry, I lost, to speak or hear, please advise me now. Assistance will be provided if necessary. And then lastly, once arguments are concluded, the committee may go into closed session to deliberate. If any committee member does wish to speak, if I don't notice, obviously call out and let me know. So staff, is there anyone that can keep track of the time involved here, or should I just set my Watch up here to do it.
I think we'll both be okay, Alder Galvin.
All right. I've never heard Phil speak for more than 10 minutes at a time, so not too worried. All right, Phil, anytime you're ready, either you or Brad, go ahead.
All right, first, thank you for having us. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Your list of documents is quite long. And I understand that you have our grievances, number 3 and number 4. You have the chief's response to both. You have Director Fauld's initial response, Director Fauld's legal argument to the committee. And I just wanted to try to break this down in 3 questions in regards to your analysis of this grievance. And I appreciate you taking the time to take a look at it. The first question I would like you to consider is, can the chief or his designee order a Green Bay PPA member to flex their workday to attend monthly special unit training? And in this case, it's dive training and SWAT training. So that's the first question. The second question is, what is flexing mean in regards to the plain language of our contract, our past practice in the management of our department and our membership? And third, can the chief or his designated managers allow some of our members to accrue payback for special unit training while not allowing others for no rational reason? And I'd like to start with number 1, if you're ready. Can the chief force GBPPA members to flex their day for SWAT training or FAR dive training? The association's position is absolutely not. And I think if you ask Commander Warwick and ask Commander Abel, I think their position would be no as well. And that is clearly reflected in Commander Paul Abel's 2016, is it? Memo, 2014 memo, where he clearly says officers have the ability to flex their day, or they may choose to work their shift to the start of the training and then attend the specialty training. And I also think the management decision to order a member to flex their day is at odds with our contract. And I think it comes down to simply may versus shall. In both the articles of the labor agreement that regarding SWAT training and dive training in Article 7, both are very specific that we may flex our day for training. It does not say shall. And I'll draw a quick distinction between, let's say, canine training, where it says canine handlers shall flex their day for training. And they all do. Every training, they flex their day for training. It's not an option as defined in Commander Abel or Commander Warwick's memos regarding special unit training, because there is that distinction between shall and may. And the association's position on this day regarding this grievance with Detective Kemp and myself as the named grievance, that we were essentially forced to flex our day. The grievance that we wrote is very clear that Lieutenant Gehring made it very specific that we had to ask permission to work our core hours, to work at 7 a.m., which means he flexed our day without our permission. It would be impractical of a manager to expect an employee to ask permission to work their core hours if they hadn't already flexed their day. Detective Kemp or I agreed to flex our day on that date. That's number 1. Number 2, what does flexing mean? And to me, it's quite simple. To most of the employees of the Green Bay Police Department, I believe it's a quite simple concept because we live it, we work it. And what I can tell you is flexing your schedule means that if I'm a day shift employee, I work 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. My tel staff reflects that to infinity. If I choose to flex my schedule, I ask permission, and I might change my workday from 7 to 3:30 to 9 a.m. to 5:30 or to 5 a.m. to 1:30. But I essentially flex my 8.5-hour period of work is what our department has consistently determined to be flexing the schedule. And the reason why I wanted to draw this distinction is if you look at Director Falls' legal assessments, I don't believe he really answers the question of our grievance. And the questions in our grievance is, can we be forced to flex our day? Director Falls, in his assessment of our grievance, is asking the committee to not allow us to flex our day without permission. And the association at no time in our grievance flex our day without permission. Detective Kemp, myself, we wanted to work our core day at 7 a.m. and not flex our day. So that is the terms of this grievance, not in any way. We will concede without argument that I cannot flex my workday without permission. But we'll also argue on behalf of the association that we cannot be forced to flex our workday for the purposes of SWAT and dive because the contract says may, not shall. And I also say that Director Falls' assessment of this grievance being about flexing our day is inconsistent with Commander Abel's memo. Commander Abel is a 30-year veteran of the police department. He's been the commander for probably the most senior commander of the department. And Commander Abel's definition of flexing is quite clear in his memo. He refers, and I quote, "The officer has the ability to flex their schedule in order to attend a training, or they may choose to work their shift up until the start of their training, then attend the scheduled training," which is exactly what Detective Kemp and I wanted to do on that date. And also Officer Kenny in regards to dive team. Yeah, Director Falls' legal document, I believe it's the January 6th one. On page 2, Director Falls gives a series of options that he says our interpretation of the contract allows. And I will quote, one of the options, option 2, bullet point document, is the officer may, bullet point 2, arrive at 7 a.m., work until 11 a.m. in his or her regular capacity, and then stop working one's core schedule to flex his or her schedule to attend specialty team training from 11 a.m. to 9:30. So what we have is a direct distinction between Director Falls' definition of what flexing your day means. Commander Abel is quite clear that flexing your day, along with the common practice of using telestaff and flexing our work days, is flexing your 8.5-hour workday and take you off of your core job to attend training on your duty time. Director Falls' definition is not that. Director Falls' definition is flexing, meaning you work your core hours till 11 and then somehow flex from 11 to 9:30. It doesn't make sense. It's clearly at odds with Commander Abel's definition. And it's also at odds with Commander Kevin Work's Special Unit Supervisor memo. It essentially says officers will obtain direct supervisor approval to flex their schedule to attend training. We agree with that. In fact, in this case, Detective Kemp and I didn't ask Lieutenant Gehring because we were not attempting to do that. We were attempting to do exactly what Captain Abel said we can do in 2014 and has been an accepted practice for the last 6 years, is we were choosing to work our scheduled workday and then attend training for the remainder of our workday and then training after our workday. And then lastly, my last question is, can the chief and his designated managers essentially check in plain language? And I will say not if it's not rational. The association believes that should the city be in such dire economical situation that they can afford to pay payback for training, which is the designated compensation for our off-time training, then they have the right not to train us. They can not send us to training on our off time. But to allow some of our members to attend training on their off time and to not allow others doesn't make sense. and also the method. What's used here is there's some conversation in these documents regarding notice, proper notice. Here's our response to that. One is Commander Abel's. Well, first of all, Commander Warwick's memo was written after this grievance, okay, after the event. So prior to that memo, we were operating under Commander Abel from 2014. And if you look at the last says their attendance and training demands are on safety staffing level to maintain a 2-person buffer. In order to assist the effective shifts with planning their shift levels 6 days out, please have the officers assigned to your teams inform you of their intent to flex their shift or their shift the minimum of 10 days prior to scheduled training. I would like to note that is not a policy in our policy manual. That is a direction from Able to special unit commanders, simply basically saying, talk to your people, find out what they want to do. If they want to flex, they can. If the staffing is allowed, if they choose to work their workday, they can. That is what that says. And that has been the operating practice for the last at least 6 years. I can tell you on the day in question, Officer Tim Michael is one of the officers that we were told was allowed, was either gave no notice, was not asked to give notice, and it was just assumed he would work his workday. And he did work his workday and then went to training, which is inconsistent with the management of Detective Kemp and myself, who were ordered to flex our workday, asked permission not to if we chose to, and then because we didn't, we're not allowed to attend training. And I think Officer Kenny's scenario was a little bit different even than that.
Bill?
Yes.
Bill? I'm sorry to interrupt, but...
I'm at 10 minutes? Okay. I'm at 10 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, but okay, that's what Lindsay was doing?
Okay.
That's the 10-minute
Yes.
wave?
I got my points in. I said I'd be brief. I apologize for talking longer than I should have.
And Phil, if you got a couple small points you want to make real quick, definitely take the time. If you got some bullet points there you think we should hear, then
Yeah, the last point is Officer Kenny's management was different. Steve Mahoney, his lieutenant, typically asked him a week ahead of time, hey, do you want to flex your day or not? He up until that day, this grievance, that was always the standard. There was no formal notice. There was no order to change his hours. And Officer Tim Elkalt was never asked to provide a notice. The shift commander never required to give him a notice. He was always scheduled to be on the road, on the street until training started, if staffing allowed to be pulled off. So basically the GPPA opines that inconsistent type of managing payback accruals is not rational.
All right.
That'd be the end of that.
All right. I'd like to, could I ask some questions of Detective Scanlon at this time and other members? Would that be appropriate?
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Alder Dorf has her hand up. Go ahead, Alder Dorf.
Okay. Detective Scanlon, I read all of the documents, and I thank you for the clarification, because it was seeming like the difference was asking permission or informing the supervisor gave people permission then to stay late and to get paid for the extra time. But my question would be, have you or have the officers ever worked core hours and then just stayed on and gotten paid extra for staying late for the training without flexing hours or without getting permission for flexing hours?
I with full confidence that I went to day shift detectives in 2014, and I do not know of one monthly training where I did not do just that. I worked at 7 a.m. And I did my detective work until 11 a.m. So did Detective Kemp. At 11 a.m., because we were on the schedule to go to training, we left our detective duties, went to training, and then trained till 3:30, technically on city time, because that's when I worked. And after 3:30, stayed till the end of training and earned payback, because the compensation for training on your off time is payback. It's not overtime, it's payback. I'll give you the same answer. I believe Officer Kenny is on. He'll give you the same answer. I will tell you, as a matter of just clarity, that there are individual members of our bargaining unit that don't want to work 12 hours, Ms. Dorf, and they choose to flex their day. So they ask permission, and they would rather only work an 8.5-hour day, and they attend training. But there are members of our unit, because of whether they're on patrol or because whether they're a detective or a traffic car, that have chose for many, many, many years to work their core shift and then attend training. And up until August 6th, if that's the date, that was never an issue. And it is a new rule. And I think that's why it resulted in 3 grievances in one, because different individuals were managed differently. And that is the essential of our grievance.
Do you believe if you had asked permission or indicated that that's what you wanted to do, that would have been granted?
I was told unequivocally by Lieutenant Gehring that his directive is to reduce payback costs. I have an email from Commander Wark. I don't have it in front of me. He essentially told me that going forward, if people choose not to flex their day, they're not going to be able to stay and earn payback. I might have that email in front of me.
And whether you do or not, do you believe that because the city is in a financial difficulty because of COVID and other things, do you believe that is why this is being asked of you?
And I understand it's being asked, but what the association is pointing out is, our contract specifies, our labor agreement with the city specifies compensation for spot training on your off time is payback. The city sets the training schedule. They choose to train us when they choose. It's on some employees' workday. It's on some employees' off day. And there is pros and cons to both. As you know, we used to get paid overtime to train. And at that time, they tried to get everyone to train on duty to reduce the cost of overtime. Then they realized if we have everyone who's supposed to be working training, we either can't send people to training because of staffing levels, or nobody's working. So we came up with payback, and our association agreed to get rid of overtime, which was unheard of in most labor unions, to train at payback at a straight time rate, so we'd be on our off time. And that has been the standard for the last at least 6 years. That has been the standard until August 6th, that we are now being told that if we do not flex our day, it'll be up to the individual manager to decide whether or not we can stay and earn payback. And it's the association's position that inconsistent type of management, that one manager might allow it, but another manager will choose not to, is discriminatory.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Are there any other committee members that have questions? Are there any alders that are present that have questions? All right, Phil, I have some questions for you.
Sure.
Payback currently, does the person that earns payback, is that reflected in a straight pay on their paycheck, or are they allowed to use it for time off or to carry into retirement?
The current rule in the contract is that payback is earned at a straight time rate as paper time to be used as off time until any respective employee earns 100 hours. So should any respective employee earn 100 hours of payback in their bank, any payback earned after that is paid out on a paycheck, just like working 1 hour of straight time.
Okay. And then that 100 hours can be used to take 100 hours of off time in addition to vacation time. Or if they were out of sick time, they could use it for sick time too.
Payback can be used as paid off time, similar to vacation, personal days.
Okay. Are you allowed to carry it into retirement anymore?
The current labor agreement is that it is paid out as a cash value at separation.
Okay. Did you know going into work that day that Lieutenant Gehring had changed your shift and Detective Kemp's shift?
That's a good question, and I don't know that I know the answer. Lieutenant Gehring had told me in a pointed meeting that I'm expected to change my work hours. And as a employee who understands our labor agreement, I told him pretty pointedly, I don't think you can order me to work 11 a.m. to 7:30. I mean, he can, but I think he didn't order me per se. He basically told us that essentially it was out there looming that if I did not flex my day, I would be sent home. I expected that.
You kind of knew going into work that day that this conversation you had with Lieutenant Gehring may be taking place.
Well, no, this conversation was earlier, and I knew that he wanted me to flex my work day, and I told him I did not want to.
Okay.
And then we left it at that. So I anticipated going into work that morning at 7 a.m. that this might come to a head. Is that a fair way to explain it?
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
but you don't recall, and I can ask Kevin later on, and it really has no bearing on the substance of this. I just was wondering, if this was something you saw coming, you just thought at some point we have to draw the line in the sand and get into the grievance to try and get it squared away.
This was such a common occurrence for employees to work their workday prior to training. I had hoped it wouldn't come to sending us home, but he chose to.
Okay. And does management ask officers a lot to flex their schedule?
Yes.
Like, would you say on a weekly basis, daily basis?
I would say that officers are asked and voluntarily flex their schedule for certain trainings. I know as being a detective, we're asked at times to come in a little early for a meeting or to stay a little late for a meeting. I know people in special units are asked to flex their day. It all depends on the respective contract language for that respective specialty unit. As I said earlier, the K-9 unit has no choice. They shall flex their day for training, so they do. If that makes sense.
Okay. Has the city tried to negotiate with the bargaining unit about the specialty teams flexing to make it a shall instead of a may?
I don't know if they ever specifically said to make it a shall versus may. I can tell you from my recollection during contract negotiations, we're currently not in contract. We're at impasse. That was brought up by negotiations to change the agreement that all special. Well, I shouldn't say all. I think we're talking about SWAT and dive specifically. I'm going off memory. Would be expected to train on duty. So yes, essentially shall.
Okay, so they're attempting to get the word the same way the K-9 unit does.
To some extent, yes.
Right, but right now it's tied up in negotiations, and so that's why there hasn't been any movement on it.
Correct. That there's been no agreement made to change that language.
Okay. Is flexing the schedule done for personal reasons for officers?
Absolutely.
So if an officer had to say, take a child to the doctor and they didn't want to take time off or that they to flex their schedule if their supervisor allows it and do it that way. Is that correct?
That is correct for people that are in specialty units. That is not correct for people in patrol. But for people in detectives, for community police, yes, a officer or any person in that type of unit can go to a supervisor and say, hey, can I start my day at 9? I have a daycare issue and I'll work till 5:30. That's correct.
Okay. And as far as Officer Kenny is involved, was the reason he was asked to flex, was that because of they tried to keep the 2-man buffer on the shifts for safety reasons?
I think Officer Kenny's here. You want to ask him directly?
Sure. I don't see him on the screen, but go ahead. If Officer Kenny's here.
Okay, he's not.
He's not.
I had spoke to Officer Kenny. Officer Kenny chose not to flex his workday. He told me that he was told by Lieutenant Mahoney he would be sent home because he wasn't going to get paid payback.
Okay, so he anticipated this was going to happen. Is that correct?
He was told either the day of training or shortly before that if he did not flex his day, he would not get paid payback. He would go home. And along that note, I will also say that one officer on the dive team was forced to cancel vacation to attend training so he wouldn't be compensated by payback, which is completely at odds with any past practice or our contract, and was immediately corrected by a higher ranking member of our department that made sure Mahoney chose not to do that again. And that is the inconsistency that we're referring to with the different managers demanding different things from their employees, which is completely at odds with Paul Abel's simple language in 2014 and Commander Warwick's memo. There's all these different members of our association are being told different things by their command staffs in regard to what to do or how to do it.
So what you're saying is there were two patrol officers scheduled for dive training on the same day. One of them was Officer Kenny, and he wanted to work his entire shift, then attend training and get straight payback for that. But another officer took vacation so he could attend training. Is that what you're saying?
No. Officer Kenny was scheduled to work his normal shift until SWAT training started, just like the SWAT team, till dive training started, and then a planned to leave his shift and attend training.
Right.
And he was told once his shift was done, he could not stay at training. Who had a vacation scheduled on the books for a period of time, it was Officer Opichka, something to the effect of his vacation changed and he wanted to come training. He was told he could not attend training while still on vacation. He had to cancel his training, be put back in on the staffing, and then flex his day.
Okay.
Which was immediately corrected by a ranking captain that said that won't happen again.
Okay. Did management ever approach the bargaining and have discussions with you? I realize your contract's in negotiations right now, but as an aside to say, you know something, 2020 sucks. We're hurting financially. Can we get everyone in the special units to flex their days to reduce some of the financial strain on the city?
Collectively, no.
Okay. And as you understand management rights, do you think management has the right to order officers to flex their work schedules, to comply with trying not to work, training, and collect straight back pay?
I think that would be at complete odds with our contract language and what we've been doing for many, many years.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you very much. Alderdorf has another question.
I do, if I'm allowed. So 3 questions, actually. So as I things and as I'm just listening very, very hard, it appears to me that there might be different issues than just contract language. And do you believe that the 3 officers involved are being targeted for some reason?
I'm in no position to accuse anyone of. I will draw a distinction that certain officers are being treated entirely different than the 3 grievances in this case, and that will be simply look at Officer Eichholt. Officer Eichholt is a day shift patrol officer. He was never ordered to flex his day. He was never called in and told he had to flex his day. He was never told that the SWAT team would be eliminated if we don't cut payback. It was just day in, day out, month in, month out. Officer Eichholt, a day shift patrol officer, came in at 6:15 a.m. and left if staffing permitted to go to training at 11 a.m. And that is a direct distinction versus Detective Kemp and I, who were told that we need to change our hours to reduce money, that we're expected to flex our day. And essentially we were told we had to ask permission to work our core hours, to work our normal assignment. And it's unfortunate. And to go along with your question, the chief wrote a very understandable denial of our grievance. He cites financial constraint. I respect that. His arguments are very understandable as to why he chose to deny our grievance. We just disagree. So I am not going to draw any accusation that I'm being treated differently because I'm our union president. I will just draw a distinction that Detective Kemp and I and Officer Kenny are being treated different than other officers, and that is why we have this grievance.
And is that because of the inconsistency is there a lieutenant in common here? You brought up one lieutenant's name.
Well, I can tell you that Lieutenant Gehring is the commanding officer of our SWAT team. He's the one that kind of, changed the rules on August 6th for Detective Kemp and I. He made it very clear to us this was under the direction of the chief. The chief is very clear in his denial that it was under his direction, that he has a responsibility for the finances department, and I respect that decision. But I would just say that Article 7.21 of our contract, I believe that's the SWAT contract, says compensation for training on your off time is payback. And I don't think that if you have an employee that's willing to work 12 hours for 12 hours pay, to vilify them as trying to set their schedule to earn more money, I think is unfair. There are a lot of employees that don't want to be here after 8.5 hours. And you have dedicated employees that are willing to work a 12.5-hour day. You have traffic cops that are willing to come in before their shift, run radar, write tickets, and then go to training. You have detectives that are willing to come in, work their cases, and then go to training, as opposed to just taking the morning off, drinking coffee, going and then starting our day at 11.
But dive team has a different lieutenant.
Dive team has, Lieutenant Mahoney. Lieutenant Mahoney, he ran his dive team entirely different than Lieutenant Gehring. He would occasionally pop in with Officer Kenny, ask him what he wanted to do. Officer Kenny would say, "I'm going to work my day," and up until August 6th, that was always okay. And on August 6th, that changed.
So both supervisors, both of those lieutenants, changed on that day.
Correct.
Something occurred. It wasn't just for you.
Correct, with the exception of Officer Eichel. Officer Eichel is a shift patrol officer. He came to work that day like he did for the last 3 years on the SWAT team, started his work day at 6:15, worked till 2:45, went to SWAT till 7:30 p.m. He worked his whole day and then was allowed to earn the payback, whereas Detective Kemp, myself, and Officer Kenny were sent home to avoid payback. And
there may be a reason for that, but I'll save that question for when I'm allowed to address whoever from the police department. Okay. Administration. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Alder Stoyer has a question, and then Alder Gerlach will.
Thank you, Chair. Detective Scanlon, unless I'm missing something, I've been going through the information in the packet. What is the ultimate goal here? I mean, you want to have your grievance taken care of, but what is the ultimate goal as far as what you're looking for here?
The goal is that we follow the contract, that the city sets the schedule. We never disputed that. If they schedule training on an officer's off time, he comes to training and he earns payback as compensation, which is, if they schedule it on their workday, they go to training on their workday, assuming staffing is, with the exception of safety staffing, in patrol. And that should there be an overlapping of shifts, that they follow the plain language of the contract. If the officer would rather only attend training and not his shift, he'd be allowed to seek management approval to do so. If the officer wants to work a portion of his shift, boots on the ground, if you will, prior to training or after training in accordance with Commander Abel's 2014 memo, he'd be allowed to, and then go to training.
I guess one of the questions I had, was there any monetary compensation here that you're looking for, or you're just trying to get the ruling back to what it was in your estimation?
During in the initial grievance, I can say that we did ask for it to be made whole for the 4 hours of pay. I can say I'd afford.
But you're freezing up. So you just want to be made whole for the 4 hours. I didn't quite hear you.
Am I back on?
Yeah, you were breaking up. I just
Yes.
wanted to hear if you wanted to be made whole for that 4 hour time period. Was that what you were saying? Or I misunderstood. You still broke up.
I
Anyway,
think he froze. He's frozen.
Yeah.
His internet.
Can you give me 1
something's
second
wrong.
to check my internet? Want to stop you open for a second?
Alder Galvin, I mean, I can wait on that answer. I just wanted to know if they were going to be made whole for that.
He's moving again, so
Okay.
otherwise, if we could freeze him like that, it'd be kind of fun. But
Well,
oh,
you can freeze any of us.
I thought I heard him say before he froze that he wanted the 4 hours. I thought I heard
Okay,
him say
that's
4 hours.
that's
of
all I kind of wanted to hear. If there was anything above and beyond that there was being requested, or they just want to get back to the way it was.
Sure.
You know, I understand with a grievance, a lot of times it's just a matter of, half a day of pay or a couple of different things.
Yeah, hang on a second. Detective Kemp has got his hand up. Kevin, you'll have to unmute yourself. There you go, Kevin.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I don't want to speak for Phil or anyone on the union. What I can speak for is myself. As for the grievance, I personally do not care about the 4 hours that I was sent away from. I don't care if I'm made whole. In fact, I resigned from the SWAT team a short time ago for several reasons that I'm not going to go into here. And I just want to see the contract followed as written. That's personally all I care about. But that's
All right.
my own personal belief. I can't say that's for the union. And I
All
can't
right.
say Bill's
Okay.
blocked out. So for me, this is not a monetary thing, but it appears to be a difference of how it's handled, when it's handled, or how it's appointed. And that was my concern with this.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And Detective Biller, obviously, you're a bargaining unit rep. So do you have an idea of what Phil, or actually what the unit wants here?
Phil just texted me and advised that he's signing back in if you can let him in. I think he's probably going to mirror what Kevin said. We just want the contract followed.
Okay.
I think initially that we would have liked to have been made whole, but this needs to be cleaned up. It's all over the boards from different lieutenants, and there's no consistency.
Okay.
Chair,
Yes.
if you look at the memo, the PDF that was submitted by the police department, the 3 points that they make are allow all SWAT team members to attend scheduled training on their off time, with compensation being time for time payback. Second, make SWAT team members Kemp and Scanlon whole for the time they were not allowed to attend training, while other members were allowed to attend and earn time for time payback. And third, cease and desist from discriminating against GBPPA members who seek to enforce the terms of the labor agreement. And that you can see throughout that document, it appears in a number of places under relief sought. So that is what was written. Now, has that perhaps changed? I don't know, but that is what I read.
All right. And let me see, is Phil back yet? There he is in the
I am.
flesh.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we've got you, Phil. Go ahead.
Sorry, my kid signed into Roku. Yeah, I can tell you the initial grievance. We did ask. I can't speak on behalf of the other grievance. I can tell you that I am not concerned about the 4 hours of compensation because I didn't work the 4 hours. But I'm primarily concerned about the city following our contract, the plain language of our SWAT team, and recognizing that we are not asking to flex our day without permission, that we are asking that you follow essentially Commander Abel's memo and Commander Warwick's memo. Just as a brief side note, we recognize that the city has a right to set the schedule. But we recognize the city has the right to manage their employees. But to think that the SWAT team command staff and the dive team command staff can't somehow manage their schedule without a rule that says we are allowed to flex our day or not, I think it's not practical. I think for the last many, many, many years, the SWAT team used to be overtime. Employees either they worked their day, then they went to SWAT. If SWAT was during their workday, they went to SWAT during their workday. And for many, many years, it's been the same way for the SWAT team and the dive team with payback. To now suddenly say that we can't manage these units without forcing employees to flex their day, and no, I think that's not practical.
Okay. Alder Gerlach.
Thank you. Alder Galvin, you probably can answer my questions yourself or other members of the committee because they're very basic. This is the first time I've ever dealt with any kind of labor union situation like this, and just some really basic things. First of all, do I understand correctly that this happened in August of this year of 2020 for the first time? That was the first time it ever happened.
Yes. In essence, there's been, because there's time constraints on the timely filing of grievances and that, the city recognized, or the union recognized, that the city wanted to do some work on it. So the grievances are only just now coming to this point where it's being placed in front of the personnel committee.
Okay. And does this come down to a financial strain issue? Is that what this is about? This is about, we really don't think we can afford this payback policy anymore because of COVID? Is that it?
In the chief's response, that is one of the reasons given. I don't think that is something that the city needs consider. I mean, as we considered it, because it comes down to this: was the contract violated or not? Mm-hmm. You know, is the bargaining unit wrong, or is the city correct in what they're doing? And I don't think we should look at why officers are compensated, or if the city's in financial strains or not. A contract is a contract. If they want to make sidebar agreements on the side, you know, for a certain amount of time because of, say, financial constraints, or maybe the officers would want something in place because there's problems with officers being sick or something. That's been done in the past. So I think what we have to look at more narrowly is the contract being violated or not, and not why. You know,
I
because of
understand
financial
that.
reasons.
But I think if I ask the next question, you'll understand why I'm pressing on that. And that is, the pandemic is something none of us ever faced before, and everyone had to scramble and adapt to it. And so I'm wondering, should there have been some kind of adaptation to that? Like, should the city have gone to the union and said, wait a minute, we've got to do something about this contract right now because we cannot financially meet the requirements of the contract?
This is where management rights comes into play. And so you have to look at the interpretation of the wording for management rights. So does management have the right within a situation like this to make changes unilaterally without negotiating? Or do they have to still negotiate any changes they're trying to do like this? And so that will obviously be something that has to be considered here. And I think Detective Scanlon has something he wants to add to that.
Yes, thank you.
Disregard. I'm sorry.
All right.
Thank you.
And I won't ask any more questions. I'll just listen. That helps a little bit. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns for Detective Scanlon? All right, then the city has a right to make their statement, and then we'll go into the rebuttals after that. Who will be representing the city on this?
I will probably do that. And then also Chief Smith and Commander Ward can jump in as well, and they can help answer any questions. So you've heard a lot of, all they want us to do is enforce the contract, and we want to make sure that the contract's being enforced for everyone. So what you need to do is look at the contract and see what it says. So if you look at the dive team language, it talks about how supervisor approval shall be required prior to any member flexing their hours or performing duties on their off time. That's the contract language. That's what's being enforced right now. If you look at the SWAT team, it talks about how the training plans and schedules must be approved by SWAT supervisory personnel. And also that the SWAT officers may flex their workday to attend training in accordance with 7.21. The city is enforcing the contract. And if you look at the 3 grievance today, the dive team grievance, did he receive approval before he flexes time? No. Did the SWAT officers flex their time within 7.21? No, they did not. The union is saying, please enforce the contract how the union interprets it, not how the plain language is. That's the rub we have right now. If you want to look at the past practice, you need to show that the language is ambiguous. There's been no argument that it's ambiguous, and it's not. It's very unambiguous language. It's pretty clear on its face what it states. And then when the union is looking at Commander Abel's memo, they're stating that the memo is gold, that this past practice has been happening over and over again. But they don't talk about the last line of the memo. And Detective Scanlon touched on it a little bit, but where it says that you need to give at least 10 days notice before you flex your schedule. That did not happen in any situation here. How can you rely upon the memo from Commander Abel that states exactly who can flex, when you can flex, if he did not follow his memo to what was stated? Not one officer gave notice 10 days prior that they were going to flex their schedule. Not one officer. You can't just pick and choose what is past practice, what isn't, what they can follow, what you can't follow. And then when they talked about forcing people to flex their schedules, that is not what we're talking about today. We are not stating that the police department is going to tell any of these grievance, if you work at 7 and your training is at 11:30, if you work at 7 a.m. and your training is at 11:30 a.m., the department is not saying you shall flex your schedule to start training at 11:30. What they're stating is, if you would like to flex, give us notice, we will approve that, and you may start at 7 and stop training at 3:30 p.m., or you could start your workday at 11 o'clock and end at 8:30. That way, it's an 8.5 hours day, work day, and it's approved. No one is forcing anyone to flex their schedule. That is not an issue today. What's at issue is the plain language of the contract. Was that followed? Was notice given? And it was not. If you look at the last letter that I sent you for January 6th, the last sentence that was sent to you. Let's see here. The city is not denying any officer the ability to flex one's schedule. The city is merely noting that the officers are required to obtain supervisory approval, which includes appropriate notice that one is requesting to flex his or her schedule to attend training. That's what we're talking about here. It's pretty simple. And when the officers are saying that, when they show up the day of, did the supervisor know that they're going to flex? Did the supervisor Did they know that the supervisor was going to talk to him? Isn't that an issue? How is that workable that an employee can show up and just determine, oh, I'm going to work until 3:30 today. Oh, I'm going to attend training. Oh, I'm not going to attend training. I mean, it doesn't make sense. The supervisor has to know what the schedule is, and the supervisor has to be able to approve whether or not someone can flex their schedule. The city wants to allow these officers to go to training, but wants to be fiscally responsible. So if you start your day at 7, but you want to go to training, start your day at 11:30 and go to training. That's not an issue here. That is what we're talking about. And not one of the officers gave notice to get approval to flex their schedule. That's what's at the heart of the matter here. Looks like we lost Alder Galvin.
Who's the vice chair? I think Alder Johnson. Oh, he's back. Never mind.
I apologize. I had a puppy medical emergency here. So, okay. Alder Johnson, did you have a question? No? Does Alder Dorf?
So going back to what I actually asked, I think before, this is about asking permission, whether you can do something or not do something of a supervisor. And that is what the contract says you must do. Past practice might have been different, but because the contract's not ambiguous about it, it says shall. Correct me when I get it wrong, okay? The contract says shall, must give notice. They just didn't do that. They didn't ask permission to do that. And so that is what we're talking about here. Do I understand this correctly?
So Alder Dorf, so when you look at the dive team language, okay. It is right there. It says that you shall receive from a supervisor. That's right in the dive team language. When you look at the SWAT team language, it says that an officer may flex their schedule in accordance with 7.21. And 7.21 is a 2-person buffer. That the SWAT team language does not say an officer can choose to flex whenever they want without approval. That's not at all what's in there. What they need to do is give notice that they would like to flex, and the supervisor will have that approved or not within the confines of 7.21, the 2-man buffer.
So what part of the contract says that you need to notify your supervisor whether you're going to be at work or not?
See, that would be under your management rights. That'd be under 1.2. That's a very reasonable request for every organization. And then if you look at 7.71, the dive team, it's right in there. You shall receive permission before you flex your time.
This is kind of what I always thought it was about, but okay. Thank you for your explanation.
Alder Gerlach.
I'm sorry, didn't Detective Scanlon say that the issue was not that he wanted to flex his schedule but wasn't allowed to? Wasn't it the opposite, that he didn't want to flex his schedule and he was made to?
So this, I guess what I'll explain from the situation that we have here is that Detective Scanlon, and he can answer this too, but Detective Scanlon starts his work at 7 a.m. He works until 3:30 p.m. The training starts at 11 a.m. and goes until 8:30 p.m. What he wanted to do was work at 7 and then start the training from 11 and attend the training from 11 to 8:30, which would be more than an 8.5 hour day. The supervisor said, well, no, hold on. You're going to have to stop at 3:30 because that's 8.5 hours. We don't want to incur payback because of financial situation right now. What the city is saying is that we have no issue with a police officer showing up and saying, I would like to start my day at 11 o'clock, flex my time, as long as they give the appropriate appropriate notice, and then they can go to training from 11 to 8:30. There's going to be and the sense is that there's going to be so many situations where an officer might have, let's say, a heavy workload, and the supervisor says, you know what, I think maybe you shouldn't flex your schedule, and you should work from 7 to 3:30, and you can attend, train for half the time and work for half the time. There might be times where there's a very important training, maybe 1 or 2 a year that you have to be at, you have to make. Maybe the supervisor does approve working at 7 and allows the person to go to training from 11 to 8:30. That could happen. But in all three situations, the supervisor had absolutely no opportunity to determine what the schedule is. The officer showed up and said, I'm gonna work at 7 and I'm gonna continue working till 8:30 at the training.
All right. And I don't mean to be redundant here. I just really want to make sure I understand what's going on. So you're saying that I'm a police officer, I'm on the SWAT team, my shift starts at 7 o'clock in the morning. I know that training starts at 11. If I want to attend all of the training, it's my responsibility 10 days in advance of training to seek permission to flex my schedule to attend that training. And then if I don't do that, the supervisor on the SWAT team, the supervisor of my shift, the understanding they have is that I will just work my shift until I can attend training, but I only be at training for a few hours until I have my saying?
That is exactly correct. So if you look at flexing of schedules under the SWAT team, the supervisor can flex it in accordance with 7.21. So if the two-man buffer is not met, they will not approve the flexing of schedule. And to give the supervisor 10 days of notice, they can make sure that the two-man buffer is approved. And then it's the same thing for the dive team. When you give enough notice, the supervisor can determine whether or not they can flex the schedule.
Okay, but there is no two-man buffer for detectives. So why don't we allow them then to attend, to work their shift until training starts and then attend training till the end?
I can answer that, sir.
Yes, Chief.
We do occasionally. If they have a legitimate reason to be at work, if there is a need for them to be at work and get work done that morning, just as what happened with Detective Scanlon just last month, then we will allow them to do that. But if there's nothing that needs to be done on a payback basis or during that time period, we don't need them to come in early. So really what this is going to do, if we don't settle it as we've expected to be, is it's going to really limit our ability to effectively manage our police department. Can you name another department or another business where employees get to decide when they come in, regardless of what the schedule is? See, the little bit of background on this that you may not know is we changed the SWAT training days so that we could minimize the payback time, because it was costing us a huge amount of money, in the tens of thousands of dollars, for this payback every year. Because of the city's in such a bad financial position, we changed the SWAT training day to limit the number of people that were going to be on days off or getting payback at that time. I had them go through the whole calendar year and pick those days where it would be minimum fiscal impact on the community that's paying for our SWAT team. Is why this is coming to a head now. Also, I told everybody in every department and throughout the entire police department, in every part of it, do what you can to minimize financial expenditures that are absolutely necessary this year. From the guys in the shop to the women at the records to the women at the window, everybody's being careful because this has been a really tough year for us, and it coming on top of another tough year. Shoot, we're down 14 earlier this year. We can't afford to be fast and loose with paying people to come in when they don't have a pre-approved legit and earn this payback time. So to have a functional police department, we have to be able to decide what people can't let people come up with the schedule that they want or work and incur payback whenever they choose to. And maybe in the past things were run differently and it was fast and loose and it was get what you can and okay. It's not like that anymore. We're fiscally responsible. We have a reason for letting people come in early because there's essential work that has to be done. If there's not essential work to be done, then they'll work their straight 8, their 8.5 hours, and it'll be on the SWAT team. And something else everybody should remember, Being a member of any of these teams is a voluntary assignment. Nobody's telling anybody that you have to be a SWAT team member. Nobody's telling anybody you have to be a dive team member. Those are all voluntary assignments. I love the fact that we have people that'll do that. I think it's fantastic. And we got a lot of people that want to do those positions. But this is all voluntary. If these rules are so tough that you can't handle them, or that you're not willing to abide by them, or your supervisor to come in at appropriate time, as is a management right, then you don't have to be on a SWAT team.
Let me follow it up with a question then. Chief, how long have you been the chief for Green Bay? I'm sorry? 5 years.
5 years.
And once you got your feet under you and you had studied the contract and everything, has that been what you've been doing, or until just recently, because of the financial constraints that the PD and the city are facing, now you've started really scrutinizing this payback system?
I think philosophically, I think I owe it to the community that pays our check and that pays the taxes to be as fiscally responsible as I can in everything. That means shutting off the cars when they're parking in the parking lot idling so that we don't waste gas. I could go through a litany of things that I've done to save money or to be department. We settled our contract in 2016, and since then, basically been working on this next contract. We opened up contract negotiations a couple of years ago, and we met at an impasse. But throughout that, and throughout my tenure here, I think it's my responsibility to be careful with the community's money. And this is just another one of those things where we're being careful.
Right, and I'm not arguing that, Chief. I guess what I'm asking for is some clarification. And just based on what I'm hearing in the grievance is that this scrutiny of the work schedules for the officers and earning the payback seems like something that just started like in August or so, where they started saying, no, you're saying that that's been going on before then.
No, I've been looking at all the overtime. I've been getting an overtime report every morning of what we spend our money on, whether it's late call overtime, whether it's court overtime, whether it's investigative overtime. I get a report like that every morning now that gets sent to me by email, and I look at it every morning and I try and look at how can we reduce late call overtime? How can we reduce call-in overtime when we're understaffed? How can we reduce investigative overtime? I look at that on a daily basis. So this has been ongoing for a long time. We started changing the SWAT schedule, I believe, about a year ago when I talked to Keith Gehring. He said, hey, we're spending a ton of money on payback for SWAT training. Do what we can to minimize that amount of training. Schedule on a day when more people are working so that we don't incur all this extra money that we have to pay. And that's what Keith Gehring did.
Okay, and Mr. Falls, you have your hand up. I'll get to you, Mark, in just a second here.
Yeah, I just want to add to that in the sense of, I think what you're asking is, when did the police department start in the contract language? And, I think it's been pretty recent. And I think the start was COVID kind of prompted that to a certain extent. And Chief Smith really has had the philosophy of what can we do to enforce the contract and also be fiscally responsible. So when you look at that, if you say, well, the city just started forcing the contract, well, that's exactly what the union says they want. They want us to enforce the contract as written. So when you look at the contractual language, and I've outlined this, I think, in the November letter, it's plain language. It's not unambiguous. So if you want to then go back and say, what does Commander Abel's memo say? What does the past practice say? Well, you have to show that the language is ambiguous. And then from there, you have to show that there's a consistent past practice that is followed. And they can't show that. They're not even following the memo that Commander Abel put together that you have to give 10 days of notice. So the plain language of the contract is being enforced, and that is a fairly recent activity that is happening.
Well, Joe, if I was an officer and I was going to start work at 7 a.m., SWAT training at 11, and wherever it goes to end, if I wanted to work at 7 and then do my training till the end and get the payback.
You cut out a little bit there, but did you say what would you need to do to start at 7 and then attend the full training?
No, what I'm saying is, why would I ask to flex my schedule if I wanted to work and then get the payback at the end of training? Why would I ask to flex?
Because in the contract, the only way that you can flex is with approval. It's either with the 7.21 buffer, that is for the supervisor to know whether or not they can flex. It's under the management rights that the supervisor tells you whether or not you can flex, or it's under the dive team language that you can. Now, granted, I think what we can chalk this up to a little bit is, was there some time where supervisors and police officers know the schedules and they know the SWAT team schedule, and for some time that people would just show up at 7 and attend the full training, and now the city is enforcing the contract and they're saying, whoa, past practice here. And what I'm saying is they cannot prove past practice because there's no set guideline that was in stone and no consistent enforcement of it. Like Commander Abel's policy or memo sent out, that wasn't followed. He says you need to give me 10 days notice. Did anyone give 10 days notice? How can you point to a memo saying this is past practice, but that wasn't even followed?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Alder Steuer.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting discussion. It seems like a lot of, both sides have kind of referred to this communication by Captain Abel back in 2014. I guess the question I have is that it seems pretty straightforward. Has anything been added since that time period? I know Director Falls or Chief, you could answer that. Has that been upgraded at all, or is that, I realize that's a management viewpoint. I don't know if that has to deal with the union per se, but I just want to make sure that this seems like a management directive. And I just want to make sure that this is as up to date and current as it should be.
Sure. So if you look at Commander Warwick's email that's in the packet, that was sent in September, and that's an update to, it's very similar language to what Captain Abel or Commander Abel sent out. And one thing I'd like to add is on Commander Abel's memo that was sent out in 2014. They're acknowledging that a supervisor is the one that determines who can flex and who can't flex. Management came up with that policy. If the union thinks that it's their right to choose when they can flex, then why are they going to rely on a commander to determine what the parameters of flexing are?
Okay. One other question then too for Chief. Chief Smith, you mentioned about these payback monies that, you kind of were just waving your arm and talking about there was a lot that has been spent on that. Is there a number that you can give us at all? You were talking about since August, or is this something over a period of time as far as extra monies that have been spent on this payback?
The SWAT team members, which are about 20, I was told today by one of their commanders that about 80% of them are at 100 hours. That means everything that they earn, all the payback they earn, every hour of it gets compensated in cash. It comes out of the city's financial budget. It's compensated in cash, not time. And I'm told they're about 80% of this. I don't have the exact figure of how much the SWAT team cost me or cost the city in terms of payback time for 2020. But it's certainly in the year before, it was in the high tens of thousands of dollars, is my recollection. There's because they go to 2 days of training per month, right?
Okay. I guess that's something that, might be wise to know over time. I realize you're looking at overtime every day, on all the different factions of the police department, but those are important notes that we need to know as council, try to have a handle on. So that's just my comment, and that's all I have for now. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else from the committee or any of the other alders have any questions? Otherwise, we'll go into the 5-minute follow-up from the bargaining unit and then from the city. Okay, seeing none. Phil or Brad, whichever, if you could give us about 5 minutes of a rebuttal and summation of your points here. You're on mute, Phil.
Yeah, and I'll ask, and directly towards you, I think you hit the question right on the head. Why would a day shift patrol officer or detective ask to flex their day or permission to flex their day when they don't intend to? That has been the operating practice for many, many, many years. And Director Falls is somehow legalese the definition of flexing in to leaving my duty assignment at 11 and then working till 7:30. The language of the contract is very plain. May flex our schedule. Compensation for SWAT training outside of my on my off time is payback. And to now say that we are manipulating schedules, the management sets our schedule. The chief, the command staff, any one of them are well within the right to assign any member of our organization to train during our duty time any day of the calendar year. They set the schedule. And I can tell you there's all this information about, well, how can managers know when you're working? My telestaff shows me on duty at 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., Monday through Friday, Monday through Thursday, from here to infinity. Unless I notify my command staff, I am at my post at 7 a.m. So for them to say they don't know where I am or what I'm doing, unless I notify them my intent to flex and they get permission, I am at my duty assignment at 7 a.m. And to imply that managers have no knowledge of what we're doing, that's not accurate. And I would just wanted to draw that distinction that Director Fall's rationale that Paul Abel's memo is gold. I would just simply point out the plain language of it. Commander Abel, did you freeze? Did I freeze? Bill, did you freeze?
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay. I would just like to point out the plain language of that contract. And I would like to reiterate that letter is from Commander Abel to his command staff. It is not to us. That is not an order to the membership and the rank and file to notify your command staff within 10 days. That is a directive to his supervisors to find out what they want to do in an amount of time to schedule it. And you hit the nail right on the head when you said, why would Detective Scanlon ask a question about the two-buffer? The two-person buffer is the rule for safety staffing. That is not an applicable rule in detectives. It's not an applicable rule in community police because we do not have a safety staffing or a two-person buffer in our divisions. And I have operated under three commanders, Commander Abel, Commander Runge, and I believe Commander Thomas. And every individual one of them knew Detective Kemp, Detective Scanlon, and every SWAT operator that was on detectives or dive team member. We started our day at 7, and at 11 a.m. we went to training. And that rule was changed without collective bargaining. It was a rule, and I understand the process. I understand the chief's desire to save money. I quite frankly, I would have thought when he made the number sound so high and said tens of thousands to train an entire SWAT team, I guess in the big picture of budget, I didn't think that was that much money, but that's not my decision. But I will say that I think your question, Captain Galvin, was pretty on point. Why would a day shift employee ask permission to flex when they're not flexing? And that's really at the heart of this. We're not flexing. We're working our workday. We're starting training when the department tells us to start training. Any one of my command personnel can tell me at 11 a.m., Phil, I need you on a crime. Go out and investigate it. And I don't go to training because it's my duty time. And I might miss a portion of my training. Or they can say, yep, Phil, 11 o'clock's here. Go to training. It's my duty time. And the compensation for training on outside of my duty time is payback. That's the plain language of our contract. That's all I have to say about that.
All right, Phil, let me just ask a question and kind of maybe make a statement at the same time. So you're saying the bargaining unit's interpretation of this contract is that you must seek permission from management to attend training beyond the end of your workday. You're saying that it's management that must ask you to flex your schedule. And
I am saying that management chose to schedule my SWAT training outside of my normal work hours. Every boss I work for knows when I work, and they chose to schedule my training outside of my work hours on my off time. The contract is quite clear. I get compensated. Detective Kemp gets compensated. Officer Kenny gets compensated for going to these trainings on their off time at payback. We did not. If the department schedules for that training, then naturally we would have to ask to flex our hours, or we'd have to be at our duty post for our assignment and then go to training.
So you're saying it's the officer's right to come into work until training starts, and if they're not needed at work, they can attend training, all of it, and they must be given payback for any time over their 8.5 hours. And
Yes,
that if management doesn't want them to work more than 8.5 hours, it's their job to either tell you to go home after you've hit 8.5 hours of work and training, or it's their they only want you to do 8.5 hours, but they want you to attend training. They have to ask you to flex your hours. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the flexing of hours has to be mutually agreed upon, unless it says shall in the contract, which it does not for SWAT or dive. And the decision to not allow, and our point of view is that decision to allow 1 or 2 members of a special unit not to earn payback while allowing another 7 to earn payback on their off time is for the sole purpose of trimming it by 2 is irrational.
Okay. And you're saying, and we didn't get too much information on this, but you're saying there were 7 others that were allowed to work their schedule and attend the full training so that they earned payback, but 2 were not allowed to. And I guess, do you know why 7 were allowed to and 2 were not?
Okay, I use 7 as example. I can't.
Okay.
I can't
say one other. Just say one other.
I can tell you that on the day of this training, Officer Tim Eichelt came in at 6:15 a.m. He did not give notice to work his core hours. He was not asked to work his core hours. He was scheduled on the map, no different than me. He worked till 2:45, and then he attended the entire training. So he was allowed to do exactly what I was not, or Detective Kemp was not allowed to do. He was allowed to do exactly what Officer Kenny was not allowed to do. And there are other officers that came to training on their off time as well that were allowed to attend training on payback.
But you don't know if this was through mismanagement or a mistake or an oversight or an intentional thing to, for some reason, just have certain people not attend training the whole day and let others attend training the whole day. I mean, you're not sure why that happened.
I can tell you what I was told I couldn't do, and Officer Kemp was told he couldn't do, and Lieutenant he told Officer Kenny he couldn't do it. Nobody addressed Officer Eichelt, and I believe there are other officers there on their off time as well that were allowed to earn payback for training.
All right. Thank you, Alder Dorf.
This is also for Detective Scanlon. Do you believe that management under the contract is allowed to tell you to go home at the end of your workday and to not attend the training? Is that allowable under the contract?
As long as it is not mandatory fashion. Meaning if they want to send if they don't want to let anyone on the SWAT team train and earn payback, I understand it. It costs money. But to allow Officer A, B, and C to stay and earn payback on their off time, and Officer D and E to not earn it, and citing the reason that's not consistent with our contract language, I think is not allowed. Shouldn't be allowed.
This is back to my question that I asked before, why I use the word targeted, but I should have used the word discriminated against. So you feel that certain officers were discriminated against, that is really at the basis of this, not whether or not you were sent home or someone else was sent home. You feel it's discrimination.
When I use the word discriminatory, I don't mean that's a word that can be misconstrued. You mean discriminatory fashion, meaning one was allowed one thing and another was not allowed. I am not opining or alleging that I was targeted in any way. I am just saying other officers on their off time were allowed to SWAT train and earn payback, whereas Detective Kemp, myself, and Officer Kenny were not.
And I forgot to ask that question when the administration. So when they get their turn, I will for sure ask this question as to why.
Thank you, Alder. Detective Scanlon, would we be here today if management had sent everybody home at the end of their 8.5 hours while they were in the middle of training? If nobody had been allowed to earn payback?
If nobody would not have been allowed to earn payback, we would not have had a grievance, I don't believe.
What honey?
I need your point.
I'm sorry about that.
You know, one thing that unique about that question, Captain Galvin, is that you know that SWAT teams train as a team. And I'm sure you're aware from your recollection that we have to train so much. We have to train so much in a calendar year to qualify for whatever certifications we have. So there is a requirement to train us. That is why we agreed 10 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, there's this theme that officers to get paid straight time pay for working 12 hours is greedy or cash grabbing. No, the standard for pay outside of 8.5-hour workday is overtime, and we as an association agreed to waive that and do it at duty time. You have officers that are willing to work a 12-hour day for 12 hours pay. Some of them not even 12 hours pay. Some of this 8.5 hours pay and 3.5 hours of paper payback up prior to 100 hours. So yes, to answer your question, if the city would decide that they cannot afford to train a SWAT team or a dive team, and they are not going to let the only way to compensate us on our off time is payback, and we're not going to do that. If they sent everyone home and trained everybody only on their work time, we would not have a grievance today. We would not.
Would we have a grievance if the management, say Lieutenant Gehring had come up to you and Detective Kempf and said, look, things are a little slow in the detective division. We're going to schedule you to start work at 11 o'clock so you can go straight to SWAT training and work your 8.5 hours during that SWAT training. Is there an issue with that?
I didn't want to get in earlier, even despite the chief's comment. But the day of this occurred, Detective Kemp and I identified a suspect in a local homicide. That's what we were doing. Now, are we doing that every day? No. But we also believe it's an unfair work rule to have individual different managers use 5 different measures of judging which officer gets to work their shift or not prior to training. And it violates the plain language of our contract. To one supervisor, a traffic car writing 10 tickets might satisfy that. To another supervisor, he might have a bright line rule. Nope, we are in financial strain. You're not going to work your workday. We might have another officer who's friendly to their subordinates and goes, don't worry about it, just come into work. So that is why we have the contract that specifies you can flex your day with permission. If you work outside of your hours, you get to earn payback.
Right. Thank you. And Alder Gerlach? Yes.
Question for Detective Scanlon. What is the action you are seeking?
We are asking to have in the contract filed that officers are not forced to flex their hours. And essentially that's what they're doing. If they tell an officer, if you don't flex your hours, you can't go to training, call it what you will. You're telling them they have to flex. And we're asked to have officers be given the choice to flex their hours, that they can ask management to do so, and management can approve it if they choose to. And we're allowing officers that are to work their core hours. And if the department should choose to schedule their training outside of the work hours, that they follow the contract and that we're compensated by straight time payback. That's it.
I guess I just need a really simple answer, and that is, what are you asking the council ultimately to decide to do on your behalf? What is it? Because it says here on the agenda, possible action on this grievance, and I'm wondering, what is the action? What can the council do?
Well, the council can affirm our grievance and show that in our opinion, the city was wrong in their assessment of a lieutenant ordering someone changing their hours without their agreeing to flex their day, and that won't happen anymore. The council can decide to tell the city to follow Commander Abel's instructions, that ensure that Commander Warwick's instructions follows the contract, and that the management's decision to allow officers who are part of special units to earn payback is not done in a discriminatory fashion.
If I can just interject, Alder Gerlach, just to clarify, the role of the committee will be to essentially decide what the contract language says and take action, as Detective Scanlon indicated as to whether to uphold or dismiss the grievance. So those are kind of the essential actions that will be taken, but there will be findings of fact and conclusions of law that will be issued in accordance with whatever decision the committee makes.
All right. If there's no more questions for Detective Scanlon, we'll then give the city need to rebut. And I don't know if we want to start off with Joe or the chief. Or
yeah, I can start off. So I mean, it's pretty simple. Like I said, everyone wants a contract interpreted the way they want it. They say we want to follow the contract, look at the language. So like I said, let's look at the language. So if you look at the SWAT team language, it talks about how SWAT team officers may flex their workday to attend training in accordance with 7.21. Detective Scanlon, Alder Galvin, you talked about that doesn't apply to detectives. That's talking about the patrol officers and a 2-man buffer for them. So where in the contract does it say detectives shall flex at the detective's choosing? Is there anything in the contract about detectives and flexing their schedule? I don't see anything. That reverts back to the management rights. There's nothing that talks about flexing a schedule for detectives. The 7.21 language is a 2-man buffer for patrol officers. That's what it's for. Everything else you need approval for from the supervisor. And the flexing for the SWAT team is in accordance with 7.21. That did not occur. Look at the dive team language. It says supervisor approval shall be required prior to any member flexing their hours or performing duties on their off time. That did not occur. No one can dispute that. That is a plain contractual language, and it didn't happen. That is what we're interpreting here. So when we look at the plain language, the union says interpret it. That's what the city is doing. And then the union is saying, well, no, past practice. That is what I outlined in the letter to the union, saying there's elements you have to meet to get a past practice to be affirmed and to continue with that. You have to have ambiguous language that we don't have, and you have to meet all the elements that are outlined. The union cannot show that. It's very simple. We have 3 officers. None of them got approval. They all wanted to flex their schedule on their own time. And there's other officers who are working on their off time were able to get payback. That's not the same situation. So like I said, it's following the contract language, just like the union's asking for, and that's what we're doing, and that's what we're asking for the committee to do today. So I'm not sure if Commander Warwick or Chief Smith wants to jump in with that.
One thing I wanted to clarify, if I may, on Alder Dorf's question. There were some people, and there are always going to be some people that get payback time during SWAT training. For instance, somebody that works night watch that comes into work at 11 o'clock at night has to be paid payback while they're at SWAT training because they're on a day off or they're on a time off, and we don't schedule SWAT training during that time. The SWAT team, because of what they do, it's important that they all train together. And that's one of the requirements that the SWAT team train a certain amount, but this training has to be done together. I can't have a nighttime SWAT training and an afternoon SWAT training and a daytime SWAT training. So the purpose of us consolidating their training in those few days are to ensure that the fewest people are earning payback. I think the PPA is upset because the youngest people are typically on nights and are going to be earning that payback, and not the senior people that are on days who won't be earning that payback. Finally, for me, I think Director Falls was quite clear. Management has the right to set people's schedules. If Detective Kemp and Detective Scanlon came and said, we have this incredibly important case that's a homicide, and we need to work it for 4 hours before we go to SWAT training, I would be shocked if our supervisors didn't say, yes, go ahead. In fact, I would order them or direct them to say, yes, if it's important, go ahead and do it. But if it's just a routine day and it's just done because, well, I want to come in and I want to stay late and I'm at 100 hours and I'll get straight time for the last 4, then I don't think that's a legitimate reason for people to be not flexing their schedules to the voluntary training that they have elected to go to. So I think Joe, Director Falls is quite clear. I think it's clearly a management right to manage the times that the people are at work. And I think he put it quite clearly about following the contract.
Alderdorf, go ahead.
So just to re-ask the question, Tim Eichel, is that his name? Eichel. He came in at 7 that morning, and then he was allowed to go to SWAT training at 3:30 or 3 o'clock or 11 o'clock, or stayed after his day. Is that what was done? This person was on the same schedule as Detective Scanlon?
Yeah, and I don't know what the schedule was like or what the workload was like for patrol on that particular day. I believe it was an August day, and I don't know what the minimums were. If there was plenty of staffing, then Eichel should have been told, hey, you should flex. There's no need for you to come in early. Come in at your regular SWAT day, and that 8.5 hours will be your day. If that's the case, then that was an oversight on our part, and I would ask the day watch lieutenant to look at his staffing and say, no, we don't need Officer Eichel. We're heavily deployed that day. We don't need him there. Go to your training that 8-hour day. Or look at the schedule and look what's going on and look at the number of people. Holy smokes, we're low on officers. We need you for those hours. Come on in and work your patrol shift and then go to training after.
So we can't really explain why one person was allowed to do it and then 2 other people were not allowed to do it during the same
why
shift.
The night watch guys were allowed to do it because
I'm not even right. I get
don't have
that.
an explanation for Officer Eichel except to say that I believe it was an oversight, and then maybe our day watch lieutenant was not paying close enough attention to his staffing to be able to say, hey, go to your SWAT training. That should be corrected.
But okay, so what was Detective Scanlon told prior to that day not to come in at 7 o'clock?
Are you asking?
Well, I'm asking whoever can answer the question, I guess.
I believe he was told that he was supposed to come at 11, but I don't believe he asked, and that the onus is on him to ask to come in and to flex his hours so he could work late when he came in. I believe he was told prior to that. I don't know if he was told exactly that date. Maybe he detects that question.
Well, okay, so flexing it's really the definition of flexing, right? That's what it seems like it's coming down to. So flexing is you come in at your normal time and then you flex, or your normal time makes up part of the flexing of the schedule. Detective Scanlon, were you aware prior to coming in at 7 o'clock that day that wasn't really what you were expected to do, that you were expected to come in later to attend SWAT training?
First off, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. The chief answered the whole point, first point of our addressing. The chief in his answer with Tim Eichel was essentially what the association is asking that you don't do. He said that the shift commander should have saw they're busy and should have not let him come to work at 7. That is forcing a employee to flex their workday. He answered that in your question. He said if the shift commander should have looked at Officer Eichel's schedule and told him, hey, we're slow. You don't be here. Come in at 11. That is at odds with our labor agreement. Tim Eichel is a day shift patrol officer. He is scheduled to work every day at 6:15 to 2:45 on his routine schedule. So for any manager to just say, hey, we're slow, don't come in till later, that's at odds with our contract.
Alder Galvin, are you there?
I'm here.
My recommendation would be that since we are in the rebuttal phase, that you ask each party, if they are asked a specific question, that they limit their response to answering that specific question, and then we return to the regular order that we had previously discussed.
All right. So said.
Okay. I have nothing else. Thank you.
Nothing further.
Alder Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate all of the questions. You guys are asking a lot of the questions that I had as well, but there's one that is still kind of stuck out to me that I'm just looking for some clarification on, Chief, if it's you or somebody else. I'm confused by the fact that if the SWAT team trains together and they're required to train together. In this particular instance, for example, we had 2 members who were told that they couldn't go to that training. Like, how do we reconcile that, right? Because they're supposed to train together, and now they're being told they can't train. Payback. And if we know what these training dates are, is there a reason why we like it's just not built into their schedule? Like, hey, this is SWAT training, you guys have to be there that day. It just seems a little bit odd to me that they would have to ask for 10 days notice approval to attend something that they're required to attend. So could you just walk me through that and help me understand how that process works?
The SWAT training is scheduled in advance, and they know in advance what days the SWAT training is. In other agencies that I'm aware of, that's your duty day. Your duty as SWAT trainee that day. And it's common practice throughout the policing industry that if you have a training day, that's your duty day. You don't get to come in at a different time besides your duty day and earn payback time. Or you don't get to decide you want to come in on your early day and then earn payback time. They were told that in advance, and that's why they did go to the beginning of their training, but they were sent home at the end of 8.5 hours, their full day, because that was their duty day should have been SWAT, but they chose to come in early or come in at their regular time, not at the SWAT pre-scheduled SWAT training time, so that they could earn payback for those 4 hours.
So right now, would it be fair to assume that there's some ambiguous language in the contract in terms of the requirement to give the 10-day notice, meaning that perhaps the contract should be cleaned up to just say that that's your duty day?
So I think Alder Galvin asked about this, what was negotiated, and that, that's between obviously negotiations that maybe we could talk about that a little bit in closed session. So I guess I can't answer the question now. I was about to, but I think you also asked the question, Alder Johnson, is the SWAT team required to train her? And I'm just looking for Commander Warwick or Chief Smith. Do they have to train together at the same time? Is that required?
I can answer that. No, it's not required. The SWAT team is an alert level SWAT team, and they have to achieve a certain percentage. It's either 70 or 80% of the trainings. So if someone misses 1 month due to whatever reason, personal, or they just can't make it for whatever reason, they just go to the next training. But to maintain our alert status, we have to maintain that 70 or 80%.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. I don't see anybody with any other questions. Here. Darn it. Hang on a second. Got to get my script up here. Okay. All right, now we're at the point where the grievance will proceed. Okay, we've been through this. Okay, now we're gonna have to go into, unless you want to deliberate in public, or we can go into closed session to deliberate there. And I'm getting the, don't do that if you want to survive. So,
we go into closed session.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for.
Okay, and then I can read the language after there's a second.
Second. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, Alder Dorf.
The committee may convene in closed session pursuant to section 19.85 1A Wisconsin statutes for purposes of deliberating concerning a case which was the subject of any judicial or quasi-judicial trial or hearing before that governing body. The committee will thereafter reconvene in open session pursuant to section 19.852 Wisconsin statutes to take action on items discussed in closed session if appropriate and to consider the remainder of the agenda.
All right, we're in closed session.
So, Lindsay, are you able to put people in the waiting room right now?
I bet that I am.
Okay, hold on one second. Detective Scanlon, yes. Phil?
Yeah, I don't know how long that you are going to be in session, closed session. I am not in your hearing room. I am at home. I kind of have a family obligation I have to tend to. I don't want to offer any offense if I sign out and respectfully hear your decision at a later date, or do you need me to stay active in Zoom? I don't know how long you're going to be.
I'll tell you what, Phil, Attorney Mather, but if we go into closed session for, say, 4 or 5 minutes, figure out if we want to discuss this or take it under consideration and render judgment at the next meeting, could we get out and let Phil know within the next 5 minutes or so? Is that possible? I mean, let someone notify him so he can leave.
I can save us all the trouble. I don't believe it will be possible to have the findings and conclusions drafted during the course of this meeting.
Okay.
So my recommendation would be that we render the decision at the next meeting anyway.
All right, then I would suggest that unless you're an alder who wants to, or you're authorized to sit in on closed session, I would say everyone else, you can log out and head home or just do whatever you have to do at home, and you'll be notified of the next meeting date and time where the decision will be rendered at that time.
Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
And Lindsay, are you able to put people in the waiting room?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
All right. I think Director Fold is having microphone issues.
Poor guy.
Better not let my wife know about that. She'll shut me down.
You know, I had someone today that brought a microphone into my office because he said, "You're so echoey on the call." And so he literally brought his microphone from home so that I could test it after it was.
I was taking a call today and I was sitting across the table from my daughter who was doing her classes. And I was on my AirPods listening to a person who had me on speaker in their car. So I was trying to focus on what I was saying because I was getting the echo, and my daughter looks across. She's like, "You're talking really loud." Sorry. I'm like, but right now I don't even know what I'm saying.
Okay, I saw a thumbs up from Joe.
So we're recording again, Joe? Okay.
I'd like to move that we go back into open session.
Second.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we're back in. Chair, did you want to ask for a motion?
Yes, I'll ask for a motion.
Would like to make a motion that we proceed, staff proceed as directed during closed session.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. On to item number 4, a request by Alder Johnson to the Personnel Committee for an update on the Alderperson Orientation Program that was submitted approximately 2 years ago. Alder Johnson.
We'll move to hold this until next meeting.
Second.
Have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that passes unanimously. On to informational. Number 1 is a report of routine personal actions for regular employees. Does anyone have any questions for staff?
No questions.
Move to receive and place on file.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next meeting is January 26, 2021, and I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. It's been a night.
Welcome back to the new year.
Learned a lot.
That was even worse than finance. I want you to know that.
No.
That was rough.
I'll